hosting duties there. But we're gonna have a lot to talk about, so we're just gonna plow right into the Diana Ross segment, which is our first one, before Josh takes the reins, because he will be our first reactor. Matt, why don't you go ahead and run the numbers for us?
So Diana Ross's Diana from 1980 comes in at number 512 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 68 in 1980, number 3,272 of all time. It did make Rolling Stone's list. Actually, the only album that we're covering tonight, fun fact, that did make Rolling Stone's list. And it comes in at number 394 on Rolling Stone.
Okay. And I did put Upside Down in the montage for those that have listened. Those have already listened, but for my friends.
And this is Diana Ross's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. So,
and that's probably one of her highest rated songs, I would say. Most popular, well-known song.
There you go, Josh.
Yep. So Diana Ross, Diana, I had not heard this album before. Of course, I had heard Upside Down and I'm Coming Out. Those are the two biggest singles off of this album.
Had you heard them, or had you heard them through Bad Boy music?
Well, both. I've heard both. Yes, of course. How can you hear that song and not think of Puffy and Mace singing it? But
that's I'm Coming Out for someone like Matt who may have no idea what we're talking about.
I actually did have an idea of what you were talking about.
The other big sample was Upside Down, was used in MC Light's Cold Rock the Party, which was another 90s jamma. So
now that I did not know. So
straight jamma. And so I'm really glad we listened to that Chic album back in the Cold Listen when we did in the 70s, because that is who produced, or not, Niles Rodgers produced this album, and you can hear Chic all over this album. And I unfortunately have mixed feelings about this album as a result. I really like Diana Ross, and I like her voice especially. It sounds so, especially compared to today's singers, it sounds so natural and unproduced. You can kind of hear the different, imperfections in it, but she still sounds really good, and she's got just kind of not angelic quality, but she has a really like kind of light voice, but there's still something like powerful about it, which I really appreciate. But on the flip side, the Chic stuff, it's really just almost like a Chic album with Diana Ross over it. So I've got the same complaints that I had about the Chic album. It's very repetitive. It's very intentionally dance focused / disco focused, to where the tracks seem really long as a result, so that people can continue dancing to them. And some of the lyrics themselves are kind of silly in my opinion, like My Old Piano or have fun like a child. I think she says over and over again.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, but it does have fun again, so it does lend itself to be saying it a lot of
Children
times.
do like to have fun, though, so I do. She's right about that.
Okay, well, she's singing the truth, but that doesn't make the lyrics.
It's her truth.
Less silly. But you still, and then I guess on the positive side of the Chic front, you still have those like really good bass lines and some strong guitar work and stuff like that. But I guess it is a kind of standout Diana Ross performance as a result of her singing over this stuff. But there wasn't enough depth there for me to really appreciate, I think, all she has to offer. I think there's something more there that I haven't heard. She's been performing since she was in the Supremes, back in the 60s. So this is an interesting turning point, since we haven't discussed any of her albums. Did we discuss the Supremes on a Cold Listen back in the 60s? I can't remember.
That was a
Matt and I
bonus.
did.
That was like, I think that might have been the first. Was that the first like bonus episode? Josh, you were biking across Nebraska or something when we did that.
First bonus episode, first segment, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the only other time we've touched on her, and I honestly can't remember my thoughts on that album. But I guess that's kind of the starting point. Those were my initial thoughts on this album.
Okay, Matt, your take?
Well, I do remember that album, Josh. That was the Supremes album, and that was like ear candy. That was just like great, kind of like a 60s / 50s doo-wop, just classic songs that you just know immediately. And this is clearly a different thing. I mean, it's much later, and I'm pretty sure all of these songs are written by Nile Rodgers and the other Chic guy. I don't know his name. Bernard.
I'll look it up.
You look it up, Josh. He's cleaning that stack. So so yes, it definitely sounds very much like was it Risque? Was the Chic album that we covered?
Mm-hmm.
I'm mixed on this too. I think that I'm just looking at the Spotify list here and the number of plays, and it's like the order, the most plays are the best songs, right? So I'm Coming Out and Upside Down are by far the biggest hits on Spotify, and those are the songs that I like the most. Those are just really upbeat, fun, danceable songs. I actually don't think that those songs are too long. I thought the Chic album maybe suffered a little bit more from the length in some songs, more so than this did. But Upside Down is a great intro to this album. I'm Coming Out, obviously knew immediately. Before listening to this record, I probably couldn't have told you that is that a Biggie song or is that a Puff Daddy song?
It's a Biggie song.
It's a Biggie song,
technically.
Okay.
Yep.
So I couldn't have told you what was sampled from that. I don't know what artist. I couldn't have told you it was Diana Ross, but as soon as I heard it, I knew it. It's great. So it reminded me very much of that song, which I do like as well. I thought Tenderness, the second track, was pretty good. Kind of kept it going. My Old Piano's probably the other one that I liked. Kind of another upbeat, fun song, but it kind of like there's the rest of the songs kind of laid flat for me. I don't like the Friend to Friend, the ballad. It could just do without that. What is it? Now That You're Gone really didn't do much for me either. And then Give Up, the last track too. So I'd say this is like half and half. I'd say half the album I liked and half I didn't. Have Fun Again absolutely went too long. I think they actually do like a fade out and then they bring it back again.
In case you want more.
It's the most unnecessary fade out, fade in, move that we've heard so far. It just didn't do anything special. And it wasn't needed. I was definitely ready for that song to be over probably 3 minutes beforehand. But so yeah, it's disco. It's certainly very much disco, which is another. Is a genre that I'm okay with. I don't hate it. Disco, it's an easy genre to kind of, crap all over and whatnot. And it certainly was at the time. Like you couldn't like disco and be cool. It wasn't the hip thing to be into. I think it's, people have been a little bit more forgiving of it in recent years.
I think there was a period in time where you could like disco and you were cool. Like in the early stages when it was like an underground, like gay phenomenon. And then kind of
before it became popular.
Selling.
Okay.
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah,
for sure.
But it's just I'm just reminded of all that disco sucks. Let's burn your disco albums, and
that's
just
the backlash period.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what I think. A little bit more of that.
Well, that's like remembering grunge when
Creed
1997. Yeah, like that's there was a period, but if you just knew it as that, you're like, oh, grunge. It's so
Yeah. So I'm fine with it. Again, it's not something I'm going to be putting on, but it's something, if you're playing at a wedding or just, at a dance or something like that, it's good. But yeah, it's half and half for me. The stuff I like, I don't know. She could do without the ballad. She could do without the length. And I don't know, maybe this would be a better EP. I would say that this would be a good 4-track EP. Is what I would if Matt got to redo this album. But again, it's also not for me, so I'm looking at this through a different lens than somebody else. But clearly a lot of other people, I mean, even modern artists and whatnot, I mean, with it making the only album tonight making Rolling Stone's list, it's hitting a chord with people, and the samples are certainly important as well. But is that enough to carry the album into being like an all-time great for me? No. So I guess I'm thumbs in the middle on this one.
Also, the shortest album we listened to this week, even though it felt long at times for me, ironically. It's Bernard Edwards, by the way. He's Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards.
I think I did say Bernard. Okay, yeah.
What about you, John? What do you think?
So I did not find this album to be long, Josh. Okay. There were things I liked and things I didn't like, but I definitely felt like a quick bite. Yeah. It was funny because I thought I was going to get to my segment and say, how did none of this stuff get addressed? And then Matt started picking off some of the stuff like a rifle. So I'll kind of get into like a rifleman, I should say. But let me get into some things that we didn't touch on a ton that I think need to be mentioned on this. First of all, like Josh said, good bass. The bass lines are exceptional on this album, just like they are whenever Nile Rodgers plays. Like he has a gift, and they may be loops, which is kind of how Nile Rodgers bass lines seem like they always are. It's just these killer loops, and I know that can get tedious after a while because you're sort of hearing the same bass line or two bass lines that are
right.
You're going, but the bass lines themselves are incredible, which is why Diana Ross, and why it's like a sample machine, this album, and just Diana Ross in general was sampled constantly in terms of her stuff for hip hop, because when you think about it, that's what a beat is to some degree. It's like a bass loop. So the bass loops on this are excellent. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is the production on this album is very immaculate and at times even modern, I'd say. I have a love-hate relationship with Diana Ross's voice. I understand what Josh is saying about the natural quality of it, and there is a sultriness, and this even goes back to the Supremes when Matt and I talked about this, but there is also a lightweight quality to it, which at times I don't think it lends itself to ballads. There isn't enough voice there. And I think when you had these powerful bass lines in dance songs, it actually works very well, as did sort of that, Holland Dozier, production for Motown, right? I think it really, Diana Ross sort of needs some of that window dressing with her voice, in my opinion, to fully have it come together. She's not just going to be like a bare singer by herself. There just isn't enough voice there. And so as a result, much like Matt, I felt when the album was not ballads, it was pretty strong, and when the album went to ballads, it was not nearly as strong. I think also the fact that it was pretty standard issue, late 70s disco, Love and Loss and Love Again type songs also didn't necessarily make it a stunning vocal album. So those are some things I'd say. This is a disco album. It is definitely a disco, and it's a disco album that's designed to be danced to, and played where half of it you're dancing and half of it's the come down from the dancing. And we've joked about, like, you've got the dancing and then the coke breaks, but that's kind of a little bit of how I find disco albums get set up. There's these dance areas and then there's these come down areas. That seems to be the structure of disco albums. It was very similar to the Donna Summer album, albeit the Donna Summer album was much longer and had more tracks, but it was the same sequencing. So I would say I'm in the middle on this, because the parts I liked, like when everything came together with the parts that Diana Ross brings vocally and presence-wise, mixed with the bass lines and the guitar work and just the overall clean production, the songs are great. And that's why, songs like I'm Coming Out and Upside Down still sound modern to this day. I mean, they're disco songs, but there aren't many disco songs that sound modern, but go figure. Those are two of them, right? But it's also why something like Have Fun Again and that's got to be one of the worst songs we've listened to in the 80s right now. It was like a bingo card of it. It was repetitive musically and vocally. It was trite lyrically. It was too long. As Matt said, there was an odd fade out and even some production tricks. And in the middle of the album, it disengaged me a little bit, and I almost had to go back and listen to the back half of the album again, because it almost felt like a finale to some degree, but it shouldn't have, because it was only track number 5. And so I actually listened to the back end of the album a second time because I had to kind of get re-engaged along the way.
Did you have fun again listening to the back end?
I did not listen to Have Fun Again. I listened to My Old Piano and Now That You're Gone and Give Up Again to make sure I gave them a fair shake. But yeah, this is a quintessential thumbs in the middle album for me, because half of this album I liked and half of this album I really didn't like. And as I think Matt made a really good point, as an EP, if you took Upside Down and I'm Coming Out and added maybe 2 more tracks to it, I don't love the ballad, but maybe you throw a ballad on there as a different pace, and then maybe put on My Old Piano as the 4th song, and boom, EP.
Yeah,
good to listen to. Or you just release, in the modern context, you just release Upside Down and I'm Coming Out, and you've got 2 like bangers, and you don't need an album format. And that's a little bit of what was happening here. I almost felt like this was a collection of a couple singles in the context of an album. So
yeah.
I do appreciate that she's kind of just by herself, front and center, and there's not a lot. It's not like there's a bunch of duets on here. I mean, there is some backing vocals, but really it's just her center stage.
Well, this is
I
her
feel like
comeback
doesn't have-
album.
Yeah.
Because she kind of failed with The Wiz, right? Because that was what was right
right.
behind this, and this was sort of like, the Supremes, the album we covered from the Supremes was from 1963, so you figure it's 17 years later.
Yeah.
So, we're looking at late 30s, early 40s Diana Ross. So she's in another phase of her career. So this is sort of like, can you stay relevant? And it worked. And it's interesting because it worked as a disco album in 1980, which is when disco was sort of dying, but she sort of transcended it. So I think that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, and just to clean a stack here, Nile Rodgers actually played the guitar. It was Bernard Edwards that was the bass player. At least on this album. I don't know if they switched it up at other times, but yeah, it was Bernard Edwards slapping a bass on this album.
Well, anytime you have those guys from Chic on an album, I mean, the guitar and the bass is going to be on point, and the production's going to be very good too.
Yeah, it's not about that at all. It's just, I think it's just the quality of the songs, really. I think there's some weak sauce on here, and would prevent me from coming back to it. This, again, I could throw a couple of songs on a playlist, and be good with it to move on. So,
well, also I just looked, she's been performing so long. She's only 36 when this album came out. So.
Wow.
Yeah, she was like,
so I said late
14
60s, but I
Wow.
almost was charitable. So that would have meant that Supremes album would have come out when she was 19. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look this up now.
Because that album was from 63. If I remember the Supremes album, like 63 or 64.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was Where Did Our Love Go was from 1964.
4. Okay, so she would have been 20.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thumbs in the middle for me. It sounds like Matt, thumbs in the middle.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And Josh, thumbs trending down.
Yeah, I'm middle down.
Gotcha.
Wah, wah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, you win some, you lose some, and like I said, I don't know if there was an album that was easier for me to pick the 2 songs for the Combing the Stacks playlist than this one. I mean, it was like, it's clearly these 2. So, and that's not to say there isn't other stuff I enjoyed, but yeah, those are the headliners in a big way.